You ever see one of these? It's a marble roll game. Now, this is an old one that belongs to a good friend of ours. It's a family heirloom. They sure don't make them like this anymore. Here at Boston's Museum of Science is a high-tech version of that marble roll. It's one of the most popular exhibits here at the museum. Now, it works mostly on gravity, but there are a few electric motors that lift balls where they can be released into raceways. Once that happens, all kinds of bells and contraptions start to operate. Over here is an element that looks remarkably similar to our antique marble roll. It's a fascinating exhibit. I could watch it for hours. Before we get started, though, I want to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these, safety glasses. Now, let me show you how I built this game. Now, the first thing I want to do today is make the gutters, or trots, that the ball will roll in. And that starts out as a piece of poplar that's 2.5 inches by 1 3/8 inches. And what I want to do is rough out a half circle in each piece. I could do that with just a saw blade in my table saw, but I'm actually going to use my twin blade dado head cutter. It's a wobble type cutter with a hub, and as you turn the hub, you get a variety of different widths. Now, I want to start at about 5/16 of an inch, and I'll set it up and make one pass right down the middle of each piece at the deepest point of the trot. Okay, that's deep enough. Now I got to run that on 4 more pieces. Now for the next pass, I'm going to tilt the blade to 10 degrees, lower it a bit, and move the fence a little bit closer to start forming that circle. Well, let's see how we did. That should do it. Okay, now I just flip it around and run the other edge through. Now I'm going to tilt to 25 degrees. And before I lower the saw or move the fence, I'm going to make a test. That's great. I'll just run them through. Now I'll tilt the blade to 40 degrees and make another pass. Now I want to bring the blade back up to 15 degrees. I'm going to have to probably lower it just a little bit and readjust the fence for the final pass along each edge. I'm going to move the fence out just a little. That's it. The saw does not leave us with a perfectly smooth trot. So now it's time for a little elbow grease. First, I'll start with a very coarse 60 grit paper, and I'll just wrap it around a dowel as a form, and just keep sanding it until I start to take it down. Then I'll switch to 80 grit, and eventually 120. Now this takes some time, so be patient. The next thing I want to work on are these vertical pieces which receive the chutes. And they all fit into dados, an angled dado. And that dado has to match the slope of the chute, which is 4 degrees. Now, if I simply put a dado head cutter in the table saw and tip it to 4 degrees and start milling this dado, I'm going to have a problem, because what I'm going to end up with is sort of a sawtooth bottom dado instead of a straight bottom dado. So what I'm going to do is start with just a single table saw blade, tipped at 4 degrees, and make these shoulder cuts. Here's one of the side pieces all laid out. Each X indicates the side that I want the dado on. And because the saw blade only tips in one direction, I'll only be able to make this one and this one in this position, and I'll have to turn it around to do the other 3. That's good. Now with the saw blade tipped back to 90 degrees and with a dado head installed and set for a depth of 1/4 inch, I'll now clean out the material between the 2 shoulders. While the dado head is still in the table saw, I need to make a rabbet in the end pieces to receive the top. And on the end where the catcher is, I need another rabbet at the bottom. The ends fit into the feet, which are also dadoed. And since the table saw is already set up, I might as well do that now. It's good. The feet at each end are sloped, and all the edges are rounded over. Let's cut the slope first. Now this line is the slope that I want to cut on the foot. My miter box only goes to 45 degrees, not even close. Now the temptation is to put the piece on end. That way I could cut it, but with the narrow end against the fence, not very stable and certainly unsafe. So I want to show you a little trick. I take a piece of plywood about 6 inches wide, rest it up against a saw stop, and now I have a nice broad base for which I can secure the piece. Now this is where my laser-guided miter box comes in real handy. So all I have to do is swing the beam over until it's parallel with the line, lock it in place, and make the cut. Nice, huh? Now here I've installed a 2-inch drum sander in my drill press. And I want to use it to just knock off these sharp corners. Just freehand it a bit. These router pads come in real handy, especially when you're working with small pieces and you don't want to have to clamp them down. They hold them in place. Now I'm going to round over the edges using my router, which is equipped with a 1/4 inch round over bit and a guide bearing, so it's unnecessary to use a fence. Well, now it's time to cut the chutes to length. And remember that on both ends, I need a 4-degree cut. So I'm back over at the miter box, which I'll set on 4 degrees. Cut one end of the chute. Now, whenever I want to make very precise measurements, I don't hook the end of my tape on the piece of wood, because these tips tend to wear out in time, or some glue might get stuck in it and it doesn't want to work properly. What I like to do is hold the indicator line for 1 inch as my beginning point, right on the very end of the piece, and then come down and mark the length. Now I want a length of 23 1/16, so I have to add an inch, 24 1/16. Now without moving the piece, I'm now going to slide my stop block in place so that all the 4 remaining pieces will be exactly the same length as this first one. But I think it's a good idea at this point to dry fit all the pieces together to make sure they're the correct length before I put any glue or fasteners in. It also gives me an opportunity to label the location of all the holes. 1 being here, 2 at the end of this chute, 3, 4, 5. There'll be no holes in the bottom chute, but I will make a hole through the end so the balls can go into the catcher. To drill the holes, I've equipped my drill press with a 1 3/4 inch Forstner bit and a straight edge so that each hole will be in the center of the piece. Now when it comes to drilling the chutes, I don't want to start from the chute side because it's going to hit the edges before the point makes contact with the wood. So I simply flip it over. The last hole that I have to drill is through the end and the foot. And so that the holes will line up, I'm going to temporarily fasten the foot. Now here I'm just using a wood rasp to remove any tear out that might have occurred and get rid of some of the sharp edges. Now on edges along the side, I'm just going to take a 1-inch dowel and some sticky 120 grit sandpaper, apply it to the dowel, and just use it to work around all the edges. Using the same 1/4 inch round over bit that I used earlier to ease the edges on the foot, I'm now doing the bottom edge of the holes on the chutes. I'll do both edges on the top piece. Here I'm pre-drilling and counter-boring holes for the screws that will be used to attach the chutes to the sides. Now I'm ready for a little assembly. Some glue in each joint. And then I'll just slip it together. And install a couple screws. Now I'm using a 1-inch screw, which happens to have a square drive. And we're seeing more and more of those. Now for the top piece, now I can put one of the feet on, the one opposite the catcher. Well, let's give it a test drive. Works great. All I need to do now is build the catcher. The catcher is made up of a piece of 3/4 inch poplar cut in a circle with a groove into which I installed a wall. Now, when I built the prototype, I tried to bend a piece of 1/4 inch poplar dry, and it just broke. I tried thinner pieces dry, and it got even worse. So what I ended up doing was cutting 2 thin 1/8 inch strips and soaking them for a while, and that seemed to work fine. So that's where I want to start. Well, let's see how good they can swim. We'll let them soak in here while I build the base. Cut the circle for the catcher. I'm going to use my router, which is equipped with a 1/2 inch straight cutting bit. I'm not going to use the factory installed base. I'm going to use this homemade one, which is just a piece of 1/4 inch plywood. Now, I used the factory base to lay it out, to get the edges and locate the holes for the screws. But I put this extension on, and what that does is it allows me to cut circles. For instance, if I use this hole right here, I get about an 8-inch diameter circle, which is what the base is. If I use one way out here, I can get a hole about 18 inches. In fact, this jig will cut circles up to 20 inches in diameter. That works great. Now I'm going to change to a 1/4 inch bit and readjust the radius to cut the groove for the wall. With the groove complete, I'll cut out the throat of the catcher with a handsaw. Okay, now we'll just trim it up. I've just made some layout marks because I want to remove some material from the bottom of the leg so that the catcher can slip underneath it. Okay, let's see if we can bend the thin strips in. First thing I'm going to do, though, is take the strip and make a little notch so that it'll go beyond the groove. I'll trim off the excess later. That should be enough. Now I'm just going to make a very rough cut so that I'll be able to clear my clamp. Okay, now I'm far enough around that I can make a mark to cut the other notch. Oh, I hate to have to take this out, but I gotta remove it to cut it. Okay, now we put some glue in the groove. Spread it around. And then I'm going to use my roller here to put a little bit of glue to join the 2 1/8 inch pieces together. Now this is a water-soluble glue, so even though the wood is wet, I think when it all dries, it'll hold quite well. Okay, let's try to sneak it in there once again. If we get real good at this, we can make our own tambourine. Now I'm just going to clamp it a little bit. Now I'm going to apply a little glue to the throat of the catcher and clamp it in place. Okay, now I can remove this short clamp and trim off the excess length. Now you can see why I have to remove the extra length here, otherwise the ball won't be able to get through. Now I just need one little screw to secure the end. Now I'm just going to gently raise it up so I can put 2 screws in the bottom to secure it in place. Well, now I can remove the long clamps. Now here near the end, I'm installing a couple small clamps to squeeze the 2 laminations together. After they dry, which will be overnight, I'll do the final sanding, and then I'll think about what kind of finish I want to put on this piece. There's really only one color for this game, red. Now this is called regatta red, but it's not an ordinary paint. It's a polyurethane paint. It has no toxic fumes. I can clean up my brush when I'm done with soap and water, and it's pretty tough. Also, it's really not necessary to put any primer on the raw wood. Just 3 or 4 coats directly on the wood, and it should be ready for many years of tough use. Well, it's taken many coats to build up the finish on our marble game. But if it's going to be handed down from generation to generation, it has to be tough. Plenty of action, plenty of noise, more than enough to keep a child, or even an adult like me, occupied for hours. Now, next time we're going to build these modular furniture units, perfect for the student's room. This door unit has plenty of storage room inside. The drawer unit is more than enough for the wardrobe. And the open shelves are for storing the books. I'll show you how to build one next time, right here on the New Yankee Workshop.
More from Norm in just a couple of moments as he comes up with an alphabet wagging after the break.